Rylus Ward had seen his fair share of broken starships, but this one was something else. Its hull gleamed faintly in the starlight, yet the scorch marks and jagged tears in the plating spoke of a catastrophic failure. When his scanners first picked it up, he'd expected a derelict, no life signs, no comms. But as his ship, the Wayfinder, drew closer, a faint, flickering distress signal appeared on the display. The origin was alien. Unknown design, unfamiliar language. "Looks like someone's still breathing over there," said Lars, his first officer, leaning over the console. Lars was a burly man with a sharp wit and an even sharper knack for spotting trouble. He wore his perpetual scowl as though it were part of his uniform. "Barely," Rylus replied, scanning the energy readings. "They've got less than an hour before their oxygen runs out." Lars crossed his arms. "We don't know who's on that ship. Could be a trap. Or it could be someone who needs our help," Rylus shot back. "Get the team ready. We're going over." Rylus led the boarding party himself. The alien vessel's airlock was badly damaged, forcing them to cut their way in. Inside, the corridors were dark and eerily silent, save for the occasional spark from exposed wiring. Lars carried a portable floodlight, its beam illuminating the chaos of the ship's interior: overturned panels, shattered displays, and fragments of what must have been once advanced technology. "Looks like something hit them hard," said Lars. "Whatever happened, it wasn't recent," Rylus replied. "No heat signatures from a fight, no trace of weapons fire. It's like the ship just came apart." They moved cautiously through the cramped passageways until they reached the control room. There, slumped in a chair surrounded by cracked monitors, was the pilot. "Over here," Rylus called, hurrying forward. The figure stirred weakly as Rylus knelt beside them. The pilot was humanoid, though clearly not human. Their skin was a smooth coppery hue, and their features were sharp yet elegant. They wore a uniform adorned with intricate patterns, now torn and scorched. Rylus activated his translator. "Can you hear me? We're here to help." The alien's eyes opened slowly, revealing an otherworldly silver glow. They struggled to sit up, but Rylus gently stopped them. "Easy now. You've been through a lot. We'll get you back to my ship and patched up." "No. Must fix," the alien rasped. Their voice was melodic despite the strain, and the translator rendered their words in an oddly formal tone. "The core is failing. Must stabilize." Rylus exchanged a look with Lars. "The core? What's the core?" "They're running out of time, Captain," Lars warned. "If the core's what's keeping their oxygen going, we might lose them." Rylus nodded. "Right. You and the team secure the main systems. I'll stay here with them." Lars frowned but followed orders, leading the others deeper into the ship. Rylus turned back to the alien. "Tell me what needs to be done." The alien gestured weakly toward a console. "Bypass, relay. There. Third panel." Rylus opened the indicated panel, revealing a mess of alien circuitry. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, but he had a knack for improvisation. He pulled a multi-tool from his belt and got to work. The alien watched him closely, their breathing ragged. "You're not leaving?" they asked after a moment. "Not until you're safe," Rylus replied without looking up. They fell silent, their gaze fixed on his hands as he spliced wires and rerouted power. It was crude, but he had a feeling it would hold. "There," he said after a tense few minutes. "That should stabilize the core for now. Let's get you out of here." "I cannot leave the ship," the alien said, their voice growing firmer. "It is my duty to keep it running." Rylus sighed. "And you can't keep it running if you're dead." "We'll tow the ship back to a repair station. You'll have the tools and resources you need there." The alien hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Very well. If that is the only way." With the core stabilized and the ship no longer at immediate risk, Rylus helped the alien to their feet. "What's your name?" "I am Lyarena," they replied. "Engineer of the Shaylin Collective." "Nice to meet you, Lyarena." "I'm Rylus." Let's get you aboard the Wayfinder. By the time they reached the airlock, Lars was waiting with an exasperated look. Ship's still holding, Captain, but we don't know for how long. We need to move. Rylus helped Lyrena across the boarding tube to the Wayfinder. Once on his ship, they brought her to the med bay, where the cruise doctor administered oxygen and a few basic treatments. Lyrena protested, but the doctor's stern look silenced her. "This is temporary," she said. "You're stable, but you'll need proper medical care soon." "I have work to do," Lyrena replied. "The ship must be repaired." "It's not going anywhere without a tow," Rylus said firmly. "You'll get your ship back, but only after you're well enough to work on it. Until then, you're staying here." The alien's silver eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue further. She was exhausted, and despite her stoic exterior, it was clear she needed rest. Later that evening, Rylus found her sitting in the observation lounge. The vastness of space spread out before them, distant stars glimmering like scattered jewels. Lyrena stared out the window, her expression unreadable. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Rylus said as he approached. "Easy to forget how small we are out here." Lyrena glanced at him. "Your actions today were unexpected." "Unexpected?" He leaned against the railing, watching her. "You thought we wouldn't help?" "My people do not rely on others," she said. "We are taught to be self-sufficient. To depend on another is unusual." Rylus smiled faintly. "Sometimes it's okay to accept help. Makes the universe feel a little less empty." She didn't reply right away, her gaze returning to the stars. After a long pause, she said, "I will repay your kindness, Rylus Ward." "You don't owe me anything," he said, shaking his head. "We're in this together now. We'll get your ship fixed up and figure out the next steps from there." For the first time, she smiled, a small, hesitant expression that softened her otherwise stern features. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "Thank you," she said quietly. Rylus nodded. "You're welcome, Lyrena." The soft hum of the ship's engines was the only sound in the cramped dining area. Rylus sat across from Lyrena, the table between them scattered with various tools and parts she'd brought from her ship. Despite the surroundings, she seemed fully immersed, her long fingers deftly examining a twisted fragment of alloy. Rylus sipped his coffee, watching her in silence for a moment before speaking. "Mind telling me what that piece is supposed to be?" he asked, breaking the stillness. Lyrena's copper-toned eyes flicked up from the alloy. "A stabilizer bracket from my ship's central power conduit. I need to determine if it can be reinforced rather than replaced." "You're hoping to save it," Rylus said, nodding toward the slightly warped edge of the metal. "Not sure it's worth the risk. If that thing gives out under stress, you're going to have a much bigger problem." "It will hold," she replied confidently. "With proper adjustment, it will function better than new." Rylus leaned back in his chair, resting his hands behind his head. "You sound pretty sure of yourself." "I am," she said, her tone calm but firm. "It is my design. I know what it is capable of." He chuckled lightly. "Fair enough. Just don't say I didn't warn you if it fails." They worked together in companionable quiet for a while, Lyrena focusing on her repairs and Rylus occasionally passing her a tool or a datapad. At one point, Lars entered the dining area, his expression skeptical as he glanced between the two. "Captain," Lars began, crossing his arms, "you sure about this? Letting her work on her own parts in our ship?" Rylus raised an eyebrow. "You've got something against a little cross-species teamwork?" "Not against it," Lars said slowly. "Just cautious. We don't know much about her or her people. What if she decides to sabotage something?" Lyrena paused mid-repair, her gaze snapping to Lars. "Sabotage? I owe your captain my life. My only goal is to repair my vessel and leave your ship intact." Lars frowned, still unconvinced. Rylus waved a hand, cutting off further objections. "Relax, Lars. If she wanted to cause trouble, she had plenty of chances when we first brought her aboard. Now, if you've got something useful to add, pull up a seat and help out." The first officer sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Fine. What do you need? Lyarena looked at him, her expression neutral. If you could scan this alloy for microfractures, it would expedite the process. Lars grumbled something under his breath but complied, pulling a portable scanner from his belt and running it over the piece. The readout confirmed Lyarena's assessment, minor distortions, but nothing critical. As Lars handed the scanner back, he muttered, "Guess you know your stuff?" "I have trained extensively," Lyarena replied without a trace of smugness. She glanced at Rylus. "You surround yourself with capable individuals." Rylus smiled. "Took you long enough to notice." As they worked, the conversation gradually turned from technical discussions to more personal topics. Lars, despite his initial reluctance, found himself intrigued by Lyarena's descriptions of her homeworld's engineering academies and their meticulous approach to starship design. Lyarena, in turn, asked about Earth's technological advancements and how humans had come to traverse the stars. "So, you're telling me," Lyarena said, leaning forward slightly, "that humanity's initial deep space vessels were assembled in orbital shipyards, launched in pieces, and then connected in orbit?" "Pretty much," Lars confirmed. "We didn't have the kind of propulsion tech we do now, so we had to get creative. Modular assembly was the only way to make it work." "Fascinating," she murmured. "And these orbital facilities, were they entirely automated?" Rylus shook his head. "Not back then. We had crews working round the clock, coordinating with ground control. A lot of manual labor, a lot of trial and error." Lyarena seemed to consider this for a moment. "Your people took significant risks." "Every pioneer does," Rylus said. "How about your species? When did you first venture beyond your home system?" Lyarena hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. "It was long ago. Before I was born, of course. My ancestors discovered faster-than-light travel through crystalline energy matrices. Once the first interstellar gateway was stabilized, we established a network of colonies." Lars whistled. "Sounds like you were light years ahead of us." "Our methods were different," Lyarena said, carefully choosing her words. "Efficiency and precision were paramount. We expanded slowly, ensuring each step was fully calculated." Rylus leaned forward, curious. "And what about now? Why were you out here, so far from your territory?" Her expression clouded slightly. "I was on a private mission, seeking a resource rare among the known systems. My ship's failure occurred at the worst possible moment." "You don't have to say more," Rylus said, sensing her reluctance. "We've all had missions go sideways." Lyarena nodded, a small gesture of appreciation for his discretion. She returned to her work, and the conversation shifted back to technical matters. Despite their differences, the three of them found a rhythm, their combined skills allowing them to make steady progress. Rylus noticed that Lyarena seemed more at ease than before. She asked questions, offered insights, and even made a wry comment or two that drew a chuckle from Lars. As they finished stabilizing one of the more critical components, Lyarena set the tool down and looked at Rylus. "I must admit, Captain, I did not expect such cooperation from humans. It is refreshing." "We're not all that bad," Rylus said with a grin. "Sometimes it just takes a little work to find common ground." Lars snorted. "Don't let it go to your head, Captain. You're still the same stubborn spacer I signed up to follow." "And you're still the grumpiest first officer in the galaxy," Rylus shot back. Lyarena tilted her head, a slight smile playing at her lips. "It appears your crew is bound by more than duty." "You could say that," Rylus replied. "We've been through a lot together. Once you share a few close calls, it's hard not to trust each other." As the day wore on, they finally completed the immediate repairs. Lyarena leaned back, exhaling a quiet sigh of satisfaction. "It is not perfect, but it will hold." Rylus wiped his hands on a rag and nodded. "Looks good to me. We'll run some diagnostics tomorrow, make sure everything checks out." Lars stretched his arms, letting out a groan. "Think I'll grab some shut-eye. Try not to break anything while I'm gone." He left the dining area, leaving Rylus and Lyrena alone. Rylus turned to her. "So, how do you feel about the progress?" Lyrena looked down at the completed part, then back at him. "I feel fortunate to have had your help." "Fortunate, huh?" Rylus said, his tone light. "Guess I'll take that as a compliment." "You should," she replied, her tone teasing yet sincere. "It is not often I find such capable allies." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the hum of the engines filling the space between them. Rylus could tell that the once distant alien was beginning to see him not just as a rescuer, but as a partner. That was enough for now. Rylus wiped the sweat from his brow as he crouched in the ship's engine room, his arms elbow-deep in an exposed console. The scent of scorched metal and melted insulation filled the cramped space, but he barely noticed any more. Lyrena stood nearby, her copper skin gleaming faintly in the dim light. She was holding a diagnostic tool that looked more like a sculpture than a piece of equipment. "This line," Rylus grunted, tugging at a tangled cluster of wires, "it's feeding back into the secondary coupling. That's what's causing the overload." "I told you the primary channel couldn't handle the load," Lyrena replied. She was calm, but there was an edge of amusement in her voice. "Your approach is too linear." Rylus glanced at her, his expression wry. "Sure, rub it in. I'm just a simple guy trying to work with what I've got." "Simple," she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Your simple methods are surprisingly effective." "Primitive, perhaps, but effective." He snorted. "I'll take that as a compliment." Lyrena handed him the tool, her fingers brushing his for the briefest moment. "Here. You'll need this to realign the conduits." Their eyes met for a fraction of a second longer than necessary before Rylus returned his focus to the wiring. He wasn't sure what to make of these fleeting moments, glances, touches, the subtle shifts in tone. He told himself it was just professional camaraderie. After all, they'd spent days elbow to elbow, fixing systems together. They were bound to get comfortable, right? "You said this design was meant for self-repair," Rylus said, changing the subject. "So why are we doing all this manually?" Lyrena's face darkened slightly. "The self-repair functions rely on a specialized core crystal. It was damaged in the initial failure. Without it, much of the automated maintenance is inaccessible. Guess that's why you needed help in the first place." Rylus managed to disconnect the problematic wiring and started rearranging the connections. "Still, you've got a sharp mind for engineering. I'd bet you were top of your class back home." "I trained for many years," she admitted, her tone more subdued. "My people value precision and efficiency above all. I had to be the best." "And you were, I take it?" She hesitated before nodding. "Yes. I was recognized for my designs. This ship, in fact, was my creation." Rylus let out a low whistle. "You built this thing? No wonder you were so upset when it broke down." "It is more than just a vessel to me," Lyrena said, her voice softer now. "It represents years of effort, countless calculations, and a piece of my identity." Rylus tightened the last connector, then straightened up and wiped his hands on a rag. "Well, you'll get it back in shape." "We'll get it back in shape." "You seem confident," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Confidence is half the battle," Rylus replied. "The other half is having someone who knows what they're doing." He gave her a pointed look. Lyrena allowed a small smile. "Then perhaps we make a formidable team." "Perhaps we do," Rylus said with a grin. The intercom crackled, interrupting the moment. "Captain, we've got a comms relay on the fritz up here. Can you spare a hand?" Rylus tapped his wrist communicator. "On my way." He looked at Lyrena. "You coming?" "I will join you shortly," she said. "I wish to run a final diagnostic here." "All right, don't work too hard," he said, flashing her a quick smile before heading out. Lyrena joined him on the bridge later, just as he was finishing the comms repair. She stood quietly for a moment, observing how he interacted with the other crew members. They joked, they teased, but there was a clear respect in their voices. It was different from what she was used to. Among her people, hierarchy was rigid, and interactions were often coldly formal. Here, the crew treated each other like family. Rylus glanced over and caught her watching. Something on your mind? I find your crew's dynamic unusual, she said carefully. You allow them to speak so freely, even to you. Yeah, that's kind of the point, he replied, setting down his tools. We're all in this together. If someone spots a mistake I've made, I want them to call me out on it. It makes us stronger. She considered that, then nodded. A different approach, but I can see its merit. Lars approached, his usual scowl tempered by curiosity. Captain, I still can't figure out how her systems even function. It's like they're alive or something. Lyarena gave him a measured look. My ship's systems are based on crystalline energy patterns. They respond to external stimuli in ways your systems cannot. Lars grunted. So, it's not just tech, it's, what? Organic? Not organic, she clarified. It is a highly advanced integration of energy and matter. Difficult to explain in simple terms. Sounds complicated, Lars muttered, crossing his arms. It is, she replied. That is why it requires someone trained in our methods to maintain it. Your captain's ingenuity has been helpful, but certain processes are beyond human capability. Rylus chuckled. You know, you could just say thank you and leave it at that. She glanced at him, the hint of a smile playing on her lips. Thank you, Captain. Anytime, he said with a mock bow. Lars shook his head, muttering something about aliens and their fancy tech before walking off. Lyarena watched him go, then turned back to Rylus. Your first officer does not trust me, she said bluntly. Lars doesn't trust anyone right away, Rylus replied. It's not personal. He'll come around. Do you trust me? She asked, her voice quieter. Rylus met her gaze. You haven't given me a reason not to. She seemed to mull that over, then nodded. I will endeavor to keep it that way. Good, he said. Be calm. Bay, running diagnostics on her repaired systems. The tasks were repetitive but necessary, ensuring that every component was functioning as intended. As they worked, they talked at first about technical matters, then about broader topics. What made you want to build ships? Rylus asked at one point, his tone genuinely curious. Lyarena paused, considering her answer. My people have always been explorers. I grew up hearing stories of our first voyages to the stars, of the challenges our engineers overcame. I wanted to contribute to that legacy. So, you decided to become one of the best, he said. She nodded. It was the logical path. Logical, Rylus said with a small laugh. I get the feeling logic drives a lot of your decisions. It is an effective guide, she said simply. Though I have learned that improvisation can sometimes yield surprising results. Is that your way of saying you're impressed with my patchwork repairs? He asked, grinning. Lyarena gave him a sidelong glance. I would not use those words, but your resourcefulness has exceeded my initial expectations. High praise, he said. I'll take it. As they continued to work, Rylus found himself enjoying these moments more than he expected. Lyarena's sharp mind and calm demeanor made her an excellent partner, and he couldn't help but feel a growing respect and maybe something more toward her. But he pushed that thought aside. For now, they had a job to finish. The engine room was quiet except for the faint hum of power surging through the newly repaired conduits. Rylus stood with his arms crossed, watching the readings on a monitor as Lyarena calibrated the last of the energy regulators. She worked with precise movements, her copper-hued hands gliding over the alien controls. Well, he said, breaking the silence, I think we've got it. That's the last system running smoothly again. Lyarena glanced at him, her expression neutral but her tone carrying a hint of approval. Your assistance has been more valuable than I anticipated. Rylus chuckled. You know, I think that's your way of saying you're impressed. I am not impressed, she replied coolly, though the slight twitch at the corner of her mouth suggested otherwise. I am merely satisfied with the results. He smirked. Sure. Whatever you say, Chief Engineer. Lyarena returned her focus to the controls. There are still a few minor adjustments to make before I can fully restore my ship's primary functions. Nothing you can't handle, I'm guessing, Rylus said. So, what happens after that? You fly off into the stars, back to wherever you came from? She hesitated, her hands pausing over the console. That was my original intent, yes. But now, I am uncertain. Uncertain, he asked, leaning against the bulkhead. That's not like you. You always seem so sure of everything. Lyarena straightened, turning to face him fully. The situation has changed. I have come to realize that the assistance you and your crew have provided has been beneficial. Returning home without acknowledging that would feel incomplete. Rylus raised an eyebrow. Incomplete how? She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. I have always been taught to rely solely on my own skills and knowledge. To depend on others is unfamiliar. Well, I hate to break it to you, Rylus said with a grin, but teamwork is kind of a big deal for us humans. We don't see it as a weakness. More like a strength. That perspective is different, she admitted. It has given me much to consider. Before Rylus could reply, the ship's intercom crackled to life. Lars's voice came through, tinged with his usual gruffness. Captain, we've got a minor power fluctuation on Deck 3. You want me to handle it, or are you too busy having a philosophical debate? Rylus rolled his eyes. We'll be right there, Lars. Lyarena tilted her head. Is he always so direct? Direct? That's Lars being polite, Rylus joked. Come on, let's see what's going on. By the time they reached Deck 3, Lars was already at the main power junction, muttering under his breath as he examined the exposed circuitry. The power fluctuation wasn't severe, just a minor drop in output from one of the auxiliary generators, but it still needed fixing before it could cause any bigger issues. Lars barely looked up as Rylus and Lyarena approached. Glad you two could join me. I was starting to think I'd have to handle this solo. Relax, Lars, Rylus said. We're here now. What's the problem? Looks like the regulator's out of sync, Lars grumbled. I've been trying to recalibrate it, but it's not responding. I swear, this old bucket has a mind of its own. Lyarena stepped forward, peering at the console. Perhaps you are approaching it from the wrong angle. Lars shot her a look. Oh, really? And what angle would you suggest? She didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she examined the readings carefully before pointing to a specific line of code on the display. This sequence is creating a loop that prevents the regulator from stabilizing. If you bypass it here, she tapped a spot on the console, you should be able to regain control. Lars grumbled something unintelligible but followed her suggestion. A few moments later, the power levels evened out. He said, clearly reluctant to admit she was right. Well, that did the trick. Of course it did, Lyarena replied, her tone matter of fact. It was a simple adjustment. Rylus smirked. Nice work. See, Lars? She's not so bad. Lars grunted. I never said she was bad. Just different. Different can be good, Rylus said. He turned to Lyarena. You want to double-check the other regulators while we're here? That would be wise, she agreed, moving to the next console. As they worked, the atmosphere grew lighter. Even Lars seemed to relax a bit, cracking a dry joke or two about the ship's temperamental systems. Lyarena responded with a subtle wit that caught him off guard more than once. It wasn't long before they were trading stories, Rylus recounting a near-disastrous engine repair from years ago, Lars sharing a tale of an unexpected solar storm, and Lyarena describing a particularly complex calibration process from her training days. Rylus found himself enjoying the easy camaraderie. Despite their differences, the three of them made an effective team. And he couldn't help but notice that Lyrena seemed more at ease as well. Her guarded demeanor had softened, her sharp edges smoothing into something more approachable. Later, when the work was done and the systems were stable, the three of them returned to the bridge. Lars took his usual seat at the navigation console, leaving Rylus and Lyrena standing near the main viewport. The stars stretched out before them, an endless expanse of shimmering lights. "You know," Rylus said after a moment, "I don't think I've ever asked. What's your home system like?" Lyrena hesitated, then replied, "It is beautiful. The skies are often streaked with violet hues, and the cities are built in harmony with the natural crystalline formations. My people value balance between our technology and our environment." "Sounds nice," Rylus said. "A lot better than some of the dust balls I've visited." "Indeed," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. "It is a place of great knowledge and innovation. I spent many years studying there." "And now you're out here, halfway across the galaxy," Rylus said. "How's that feel?" She looked out at the stars, her expression thoughtful. "At first, I felt isolated. But now, after working alongside you and your crew, I find myself less alone." Rylus smiled. "Glad to hear it. You've been a good addition to the team." "Even Lars seems to tolerate me now," she said, her tone light. "Trust me, that's saying something," Rylus joked. "He doesn't warm up to people easily." They stood in silence for a while, watching the stars. Rylus glanced at her, noticing how the soft light from the viewport highlighted the faint metallic sheen of her skin. He felt a strange, growing connection, one that went beyond mere teamwork. But he kept that thought to himself. They had enough to deal with without complicating things further. "Lyrena," he said finally, "thanks for sticking around." "I know you didn't have to." "I stayed because it felt right," she said, meeting his gaze. "Perhaps that is reason enough." Rylus nodded, his smile widening. "Yeah, I'd say it is." Rylus was in the cargo bay, sorting through the remaining supplies, when Lyrena approached. He glanced up as the faint clink of her steps echoed across the metal floor. Her face was calm, but he could tell something was on her mind. "Rylus," she began, her tone unusually soft. "I have finished recalibrating the navigation array. My ship will be ready to depart by tomorrow." Rylus lowered the crate he'd been holding and leaned against a nearby stack. "Well, that's good news," he said lightly, though the weight in his chest betrayed him. "You'll finally be back on your way." "Yes," Lyrena replied, though there was a hesitation in her voice. "You and your crew have been helpful beyond my expectations. I am uncertain how to express my gratitude." "You don't have to do anything special," Rylus said. "You already thanked me 100 times while we worked on your ship." "I mean it," she said, stepping closer. "You have treated me not as a burden or an outsider, but as a member of your team. That is rare." "Hey," Rylus said with a shrug, "we've all been in tight spots. It just makes sense to help someone when you can." Lyrena nodded slowly. "Perhaps. But where I come from, assistance is seldom offered without conditions." "Then I guess we're just different that way," Rylus said, trying to keep his tone light. "We help each other out, no strings attached." "Your way is refreshing," she admitted. "I will miss it." Rylus straightened. "Miss it?" "I figured you'd be glad to get back to your own people." She hesitated again, her eyes searching his. "I thought I would be, but now I am conflicted." He raised an eyebrow. "Conflicted how?" Lyrena glanced down, her usually steady voice faltering for just a moment. "I have grown accustomed to the way you and your crew operate. Your humor, your resourcefulness, your camaraderie. It is unfamiliar to me, but I find it agreeable." "Agreeable?" Rylus echoed, a smile tugging at his lips. "That's a new one." "I am trying to articulate my thoughts clearly," she said with a touch of exasperation. "This experience has been unexpectedly pleasant." "Well, I'd say we've enjoyed having you around too," Rylus said. "Even Lars." Not that he'd admit it. Lyrena tilted her head, the faintest hint of a smile appearing. Your first officer is unique. I will remember his cautious nature. Rylus chuckled. He's a good guy. Just takes a while to warm up. Kind of like you. Her expression softened. Perhaps. A quiet moment settled between them. Rylus watched her carefully, waiting for her to continue. When she didn't, he asked, "So, what's next for you? Once your ship is ready, what's the plan?" Lyarena looked past him, toward the viewport at the far end of the bay. I had planned to return to my homeworld. To report my findings and resume my work. But now, I am considering other options. Other options? Rylus repeated. Like what? She met his gaze, her silver eyes steady. I am uncertain. I only know that leaving without acknowledging what I have learned here feels incomplete. Rylus stepped closer, leaning his shoulder against the crate. You know, just because your ship's fixed doesn't mean you have to leave right away. We could use someone with your skills. Lars wouldn't complain about having an extra engineer on board. You would offer me a place here? Lyarena asked, her voice quiet. Sure, Rylus said. You're part of the team now. At least, that's how I see it. She seemed to consider this, her expression thoughtful. It is a tempting offer. But I must weigh it carefully. My people may not approve. Since when do you care what they approve of? Rylus teased gently. You've always struck me as someone who makes her own decisions. That is true, she admitted. Still, I must think on it. Fair enough, Rylus said. No rush. Just, don't wait too long. We'll be sad to see you go. Lyarena nodded. I will let you know soon. With that, she turned and left the cargo bay. Rylus watched her go, a part of him hoping she'd decide to stay. Over the past few weeks, she'd gone from a guarded stranger to a trusted partner and maybe something more. But he knew better than to push. Whatever she chose, it had to be her decision. The next day, the crew gathered to watch Lyarena's ship prepare for departure. Lars stood beside Rylus at the viewport, his arms crossed as they observed the sleek alien vessel in the docking bay. She's leaving, huh? Lars asked, his tone unusually neutral. Looks like it, Rylus said. Unless she changes her mind at the last minute. You think she will? Lars asked, glancing at him. Rylus shrugged. I don't know. I hope so, but it's up to her. Lars was silent for a moment before saying, you know, for an alien, she's not half bad. Rylus smirked. That's high praise coming from you. Don't push it, Captain, Lars said, though there was a faint grin on his face. They watched as the docking clamps released and Lyarena's ship powered up. The engines glowed faintly, and the ship slowly began to lift off the platform. Just as it reached the base threshold, the engines cut, and the ship settled back down. What's going on? Lars asked. Rylus's communicator buzzed. He answered it, and Lyarena's voice came through. Rylus, she said, I would like to accept your offer. If it still stands. Rylus grinned, glancing at Lars. It still stands. Then I will join your crew, she said. If you will have me. Of course, Rylus said. Welcome aboard. When he ended the call, Lars raised an eyebrow. Guess she made her decision. Guess so, Rylus said. You okay with that? Lars snorted. I'll manage. Just don't expect me to start calling her chief engineer or anything. Rylus laughed. Fair enough. As Lyarena's ship settled back into the bay, Rylus felt a surprising sense of relief. She wasn't just a skilled engineer, she was someone who'd become part of their strange, makeshift family. And now, it seemed, she wasn't leaving anytime soon. Aufgeben.